Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Schwartz, and I'm the vice principal of your school. Many of you know me from my years being a teacher here, and also many of you know me as a teacher coach. I'm very excited to be starting in my new role, and in my first week here, I've been touring classrooms, speaking with teachers, speaking with students, and trying to get a sense of how much we all share the mission statement that is our vision for what we want our school to look like, and also trying to get a sense of what the classrooms look like in reality, what's really going on inside the classrooms, what kind of learning is taking place, what kind of environments we have, and how much we're all speaking the same common language in terms of where we want to get to with our students. I have had the opportunity to observe and as well as speak with teachers during their prep times, and I have really been very pleased with the fact that we all do seem to speak the language of our mission. And I think that's the first step in accomplishing anything in a school, is really having a vision that's shared, and so that people can collaborate and be able to exchange ideas and give each other feedback and support. In our school, our mission states that we teach in an inquiry-based fashion, that we want to contribute to the development of our students as lifelong learners, as people who always seek knowledge, as people who feel empowered and who see themselves as contributing members of society. And these things, I also want to add that our mission also states that we want to facilitate the development of our students as people who appreciate other cultures, people who are strong in their own cultural identity, and people who are able to appreciate similarities and differences in other cultures. All of this really begins in the classroom. So many of the discussions I've had with teachers center around our mission and around how, starting at the classroom level in the younger grades, we are a K-5 school, and we house 224 approximately students. So we are a small school with small students. We're K-5, and really the discussions have centered around how we make our vision a reality. Where do we start? We're starting at the very, very beginning, and the outcome is so big. We're really seeing ourselves as contributors to our students' graduation from elementary school, their eventual graduation from high school, and their eventual graduation from college, and their eventual giving back to the community and the global community at large in their years of adulthood. So we honestly, I think, as a staff, share the vision of seeing all these things happen, and I think that we also share a feeling of responsibility in that, even though we're starting at the very, very beginning. So the big question is, how do we start that at the classroom level? We're starting with such young children, especially our kindergarten children. How do we start this path toward this mission and making it a reality? What I want to do today is discuss 10 elements of effective instruction and authentic learning in classrooms that I think are basically mark the beginning of the journey toward actualizing our mission and seeing our students become what we want them to become. My 10 elements are based on research that I've done, and the works that I've cited at the end of the notes that I will give you at the end of the session are some of what I used. I relied on this research to fortify my ideas. A lot of these ideas come from my own experience as a teacher, my experience as a teacher coach, things I've learned in school and other places, on the job, in PDs, and I sought to find articles that I felt would be helpful for all of us to read in order to kind of internalize these ideas a little more and put them into action in our classrooms. At the beginning of this PD session, before I started to talk, I gave everyone a checklist. I hope that you're finished filling it out. The checklist just lists the 10 elements. It does not have explanations. And it asked all of you to kind of, just by the title, identify areas that you think you're strong in and to cite evidence. I'm hoping that by the end of this PD, you may have a little differing opinions than what you started. Often we think that we shine in certain areas, but we don't realize that we also shine in other areas. Often we think we shine in certain areas, and then we realize there's more to it than what we originally thought. So I'm hoping this will shed some light and help us self-reflect as educators, and will also help us to decide who we would like to pair up with to complement our strengths and challenges. I'd like everyone to choose a peer partner that you can work with and do some peer observations with each other through the month of October. I would like us to be doing some peer observations concerning the 10 elements and to be able to give each other some feedback and ideas. And then I would like us to continue to discuss these 10 elements throughout the year in more depth. I'd like to dedicate certain PD sessions to each one of these elements. Some of them actually will be paired together because there's a great deal of overlap. It's hard to talk about one in isolation, but I really would like to explore them more in depth, do a little more research, get a little deeper into the sources that I used and additional sources, and also get your own feedback and ideas and input and ideas for planning and ideas for implementing a lot of these elements in our instruction. And I'd like to see you do that on your own with each other through your peer partnerships. The first element that I look for when I come into a classroom is a supportive environment. And by supportive environment, I mean that not just physically, but also emotionally and socially. So I'm looking for a clutter-free environment where there are clear pathways, where there's clear focal points, there's a clear visual path to anything the student needs to support his attainment of instructional goals or his ability to participate in any instructional activity and achieve and do well. I'm also looking for the absence of physical barriers for students with special needs. I'm looking for the absence of physical barriers in terms of just students getting from place to place and getting materials that they need, being able to have access to peers that they need to speak to, having enough room to place their materials on tables, math manipulatives, notebooks, anything that they need to support their learning. I'm looking for a very organized and clutter-free and conducive environment. But I'm also looking for the social emotional aspect, and I'm looking for the teacher who uses elements of responsive classroom and good classroom management. I want the teacher to communicate belief in her students in a very positive learning environment. These are the things that I think provide the basis for everything else that I'm going to talk about. The next element I'm going to be looking for is teaching for understanding. And when I say teaching for understanding, it's clear to me that every single teacher in this room would obviously prefer to teach for understanding rather than teaching for misunderstanding. Clearly, it's a goal of all of ours to teach for understanding. But when I use this phrase, I'm really referring to new research that talks about more constructivist kind of learning and is less focused on a teacher passing on information to a student as a receptive body and more concerned with students constructing their own meaning and taking part in their own learning. So with that said, I'm going to move on to the next element because the truth is teaching for understanding is embodied by all of the other elements that I'm going to discuss. In a classroom, when we're teaching for understanding, we want our students to function as a community of learners, because when people function as a community of learners, they have discussions. And when discussions are sparked, people internalize concepts and they feed off of each other's ideas, and contributing to communal knowledge as well as taking from communal knowledge really paves the way for understanding. It paves the way for making connections and kind of feeding off other people's ideas. And it also paves the way for the supportive environment, because students who feel that they're an important contributing member of a community feel empowered and important, and they feel supported and they feel positive. And that is really, it's very hard to tease all of these ideas apart, because the supportive classroom really must have a community of learners, and the supportive classroom really must have teaching for understanding. So it's a very complicated task to try to tease the elements apart. The fourth element that I'm looking for is inquiry-based learning. Inquiry-based learning means that we are going to try to spark our students' interest and then have them, again, construct meaning from the materials that we're giving them, or the texts we're giving them, or the ideas we're giving them. So we're going to put the learning and the responsibility for getting answers in the hands of our students. It is a new way of planning. It's more outcome-based. We really want to think about what we want our students to learn before we plan. Before we even plan an activity, we're focused on the outcome. And then we can decide on how to hook our students' interest and get them to get curious and start asking questions. So I really would like to delve into this in more depth in another PD. It's a fascinating way to teach and learn, and it's effective, and it can't exist without a supportive environment and a community of learners and teaching for understanding, and it leads to teaching for understanding. So it's kind of like, I see all of these elements as a circle, kind of circling back around on themselves, because they all feed into each other. With that said, about inquiry-based learning and having students take ownership and kind of empower themselves and take charge of their own learning, it is important to remember the fifth element, and that is that lessons should always be aligned to very, very specific instructional goals. So we're really pointing our students in a certain direction. We're facilitating them on that path, but we don't want to veer too far off of the path. At the same time, we really want to keep our goals in mind, and we want our students to be aware of their own personal goals and of the goals and expectations that exist within the classroom. And again, it's really important to understand the techniques for staying focused on goals and the techniques for helping students recognize personal goals. And that's also something that I would like to delve into in more depth at a later date. Frequent checks for understanding with specific techniques relates back to also staying focused on goals. That's the sixth element. When I talk about frequent checks for understanding, I am talking about the frequent checks that we all do in terms of, please, anyone who understands, thumbs up. Anyone who doesn't understand, thumbs down. When we ask students to kind of reiterate what we've said or say what we've said in their own words, those are checks for understanding. But I'm really talking about something broader, which involves ongoing assessment. And when we have students working in communities or groups, and we have inquiry-based learning, and there's a lot going on in the class, it can often look like organized chaos. A lot of the time, it's really the teacher's job, while she's facilitating that learning and that communal exchange between students and the inquiry and the questioning. It's also her job or his job to keep a running assessment going, where there are many techniques for doing this, but really keeping focus goals in mind and really using student work to inform our instruction, using student answers to inform our instruction, and keeping notes on those things, and using those things to inform our strategy groups and our dynamic groupings and our skill groups, and any support that we think an individual student might need, or any student that we feel really is ready to move on and can go beyond our expectations. We need to facilitate that as well, because holding a student back who can be advanced is just as egregious as keeping a student who is struggling, letting a student like that fall between the cracks. With that said, when we are assessing and when we are checking for understanding and frequently monitoring our students, we also want to communicate to our students very high expectations. And that doesn't mean that we want to communicate it in a way that we pressure them. It means that we want to communicate very high expectations in the form of confidence in their abilities. So we constantly want to give the message, I believe in you, you can do it, and you should believe in yourself. And when we communicate those messages, especially with young children, they really believe it too, and it's true. Everyone can achieve. So we really need to know our students so that we can give them the confidence and give them the reinforcement in their areas of strength. So the ongoing assessment is really important in order for us to communicate high standards to our students. We want to really build on everyone's individual strengths, and everyone's strengths are different. So we really need to know what they are. In terms of communicating high standards, I want to say a word about rigor as well. Rigor in the classroom is something that people often mistake for lots and lots of hard work, or lots of homework, or lots of studying, or many tests. People associate rigor with hardship. So rigor is another one of the elements that I'll be looking for in the classroom. And the reason that I'm stressing rigor is because I want us to be very aware of what rigor is and how healthy it is, and how much it feeds into high expectations, and how much it feeds into focus on goals. Rigor means that we're giving every student support in his or her own unique area that they need support in. So we really need to have that ongoing assessment going, and we need to communicate those high standards so our students feel empowered to take on these rigorous tasks, and they also don't feel threatened because they know that they have all of the support they need. A rigorous task means that we're engaging our students in very high level thinking, and we're helping them to self-assess and to peer assess. And one of the devices that's recommended, and I agree with it, I've used it a lot, even with younger students in very plain language, are rubrics. Rubrics really, they remind me of ladders, and I think when a student is given a rubric, they really have a sense that they can climb higher and higher. They see where they are, they see where they need to go. It's a non-threatening way for them to self-assess. They don't even need you to give feedback when they look at a rubric most of the time. A student who knows how to use a rubric and gets comfortable with it can really self-reflect and can aspire. And they can also learn to give very constructive peer criticism, and through giving constructive peer criticism, they also learn about themselves a great deal. So I think that rigor is a very important aspect of effective teaching and effective learning. Another element I'll be looking for, which is very important in this day and age, especially with inclusive classes at every level, every grade level, is differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction really must take place in a community of learners. So we don't have to, I'm not talking about the kind of differentiated instruction where we separate students by ability. I'm talking about the type of differentiated instruction where we really address everyone's needs, and we really value everyone's strengths, and we really allow everyone to contribute. And we don't deny any student anything, but we present everything to each student in a way that builds on his or her strengths, or his or her type of intelligence or learning style. It takes a great deal of preparation, and it's a lot more complicated than I think most teachers realize. And I think it takes a very, very long time to really understand how to differentiate effectively. It's a process, and it's something that I would like for all of us to continue to work on. It's something we've been working on a lot in our school. It's very important, and it leads into the next element, which is the last one, which is a culturally responsive environment, because cultural responsiveness has so many facets, but one of them is differentiation. We have to know our students, we have to know their different backgrounds, we have to understand their different cultures. But more importantly, something that I learned about cultural responsiveness through doing this research actually is that cultural responsiveness doesn't just mean feeling that we're all the same, or treating all of our students the same way no matter where they come from, or having the same expectations. That's part of it. But really, cultural responsiveness involves a great deal of knowledge and awareness of other cultures and value systems and relationships and learning styles and all kinds of things that you never really think about because we're here and this is the way we do things here. But different students benefit, not just students with special learning needs, but students who come from different cultures also benefit from differentiated instruction. So I think it's important for us to be very knowledgeable about the cultures represented in our school and in our classrooms. And it's also very important for us to be knowledgeable about the materials that we're using, because some of them do not target children who come from different cultures, maybe less popular cultures or cultures we know less about. And we also need to be careful when we choose texts that do represent their cultures, because often they are stereotypical and they're insensitive and they promote stereotypes that just aren't true. So that was actually a new enlightening aspect of cultural responsiveness that I enjoyed learning about, and I would like to explore more with you. I hope that everyone has a little bit more of an idea of what the elements consist of and what they're about. I would like, again, I'm going to reiterate that I would like to follow them up in subsequent PDs, and I would appreciate very much anyone who would like to contribute on any of these areas. If it's an area of interest to you, if it's something you'd like to work on, if it's something you feel you shine in, if you have learned something about any of them, you have sources that we could use, I would very, very much appreciate your contributions and assistance in planning future PDs, as well as your assistance in giving feedback to peers. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to a wonderful year. Thank you.